The Core 2 quads, the first quad-core CPUs, and they're almost on their 10th birthday now. Let's see how well they hold up in games. The specs of the computer are very similar to what someone that would be buying a Core 2 quad would probably be getting. Our specs are a Core 2 quad Q8300, 8GB of DDR2, a 2GB RX 460, and a 500 watt power supply. Sorry for the crappy mic. Nothing I can do about it with the current situations. On 3D Mark Firestrike, we got a 2,605 for our score. That's really low, but for an 8-year-old CPU, that's pretty damn good, especially considering that's not even overclocked. Now, on 3D Mark Skydiver, we got 9,596. Pretty good. Now, here in Far Cry 3 at 1080p at low, medium settings with one or two things turned up to high, we're getting 30 FPS as our minimum, about 45 as our average, and 60 as our best, but that's very rarely, and yeah. Now here we see Doom 2016 at 1080p, a mix of low to medium settings, and this game is probably the worst out of all the benchmarks. We got a high of 40 FPS, a low of 25, and you get around 38 FPS. It's somewhat playable. I would not recommend this. I mean, it runs fine, but I'd recommend a lower resolution. That's just me. Now, here in Fallout 4 at 1080p medium settings, I'm getting a low of 30 FPS, a high of 57, and an average of about 45 FPS. Pretty good for an 8-year-old CPU, I must say. Here we see Fallout at 720p. We are getting an average of 61 FPS, a low of 36, and an average of 54. Now, this is quite the step up from 1080, but, I mean, it really isn't that much of an FPS difference, so I'd rather have the better resolution. Now, here on Cinebench R15, we got a score of 245. That's not bad. It's actually comparable to the Sandy Bridge i5 that I'm editing on right now. So, that's not bad considering that's a 2008 CPU. Now, for GTA 5 at 1080p, medium-high settings, I was getting a minimum of 19 FPS, a average of about 34, 35 FPS, and a high of about 40. Now, if you lower settings even more, you could get even better FPS. And the gameplay is so bad because when this was filmed, I was currently having heat issues at the moment. And also, for some reason, the desert is very CPU dependent, which creates issues with our CPU. But the rest of the map, it tends to work pretty good. Last light at very high settings at 1080p, we were getting a low of 78 FPS, a high of 108, and a medium or average of around 85 FPS. Definitely playable. Now, Metro Last Lights at 720p is really damn good. We got a low of 78 FPS, a average of 98 to about 100 FPS, and a high of about 160 FPS. What do you expect? Now, for War Thunder at 1080p, we have a low FPS of 51 and a high of 64. It literally did not jump between there, and it runs pretty good. Now, what do I think about the CPU? Does it hold up in 2016? It depends what game you're playing. If you're playing something less CPU dependent, or you're playing at a lower resolution, then yeah, this CPU is fine. But if you're playing a more CPU dependent game, or you want a full 60 FPS, I'd recommend even a low budget Pentium like a G3258 or a G4400 would be better. Even an FX chip would be better than this. But if you just want to play CS:GO and some older titles, This is a good CPU for $15. This is Savage Tech. I am out.